Hi everyone, it's Kathy, and today I have a card using the Crafting Friends stamp set from Paperie Ink, as well as the 6x9 stripes stencils from Trinity Stamps. I started out with a piece of Neenah Classic Crest cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I used painter's tape to mask off the top part of the card so that I could do some stenciling on the bottom 2/3 of the card. For the stenciling, I used Melon Ice ink from Catherine Pooler Designs and a makeup blending brush. And I did have pixie spray on the back of my stencil, but I either waited too long after I sprayed it or I didn't wait long enough. But once I started going with the brush, it stayed in place. Once I was done with that stenciling, I removed my painter's tape and masked off the stenciling so that I could use one of the small stamps in the set to create a background on the top 1/3 of the card. So a couple of tips and tricks when creating a random pattern like this. You want to make sure to go ahead and turn the stamp in all different directions and also stamp off the edge, whether it be off of the top or off of the sides. It just makes it look more like patterned paper, makes it look more organic. Anyway, after I was done with that, I removed the painter's tape and set that panel aside. Next, I stamped the panda and the few sheets of paper onto a piece of Cougar Super Smooth cardstock, and I stamped that with Catherine Pooler Midnight ink, which I'm really liking this ink. It is jet black, but she's not kidding when she says just do a little bit of a love tap on your stamp. You really barely have to put any pressure on it to get your stamp nice and inked up. Anyway, for the coloring, because a panda is primarily black and white, there's not a lot of coloring. I really just wanted to make sure to add in shadows. So I started with W2 and pretty much just followed the outline of the bear, and I also added in shadows on the bottom of his body where his foot would be casting a shadow on his tummy, and then where the paint palette would also be casting a shadow. I blended that out with W1 and then decided that I was going to draw in a line underneath where his chin would be, just so that there's more definition between his head and his body. I did a quick swipe over that with my colorless blender, and then I moved on to color in the palette and the paintbrush. I started with E35 and just did a little bit of a line around the outer edge of the palette, and then I did one quick swipe on the paintbrush handle. I colored in the rest of the palette and the rest of the paintbrush handle with E31. I did add some shading with C3 and C1 around the little sheets of paper that he's painting on. And for the bristles on the paintbrush that he's holding, I colored just the bottom part using W6. Then I decided that his little palette needed to have paint on it, so I grabbed a couple of different colors and literally just did dots on that. I'll make sure to have all of the products that I used as well as all of the Copic markers that I used listed in the description below. Then I brought in the YR07 and colored in the tip of the paintbrush bristles. And then I used my colorless blender just to blend out the C3 and C1 on those sheets of paper. And then I just drew a little heart using the Y07 on the sheets of paper. And then decided that he needed to be grounded. So well, not like he's in trouble, but I needed to add a ground so it looked like he wasn't just floating in the air. I started with E43 and added a little bit underneath the panda, and then I brought in E42 and decided that my shadow needed to go up a little higher and a little further back. Then I blended that with E41, and then I kind of went back and forth between all three colors just to really fill in the ground for him. I ran him through my Gemini Junior with a circle die, and I had also die cut a black circle with a slightly larger die. I cut a really thin piece of black cardstock and used liquid glue to adhere that to the stamped and stenciled panel. I did run the stamped and stenciled panel through my die cut machine with a stitched rectangle die, as well as a piece of black cardstock with another stitched rectangle die just slightly larger. and I adhered the panda to the black circle and then put a bunch of foam tape on the back side of that. And then I had to fill in the bottom part of the circle with E41 because there was just a little bit of a white space there. I adhered that whole panel to the front of a top folding A2 size note card and then decided to actually stamp on the inside. So I stamped the sentiment, handmade with a lot of love, and then added the little cup with all of the pens and markers and paintbrushes right next to the sentiment. I closed that up and looked at it and thought I needed to add something to it, so I grabbed my black Glaze Pen and just did a whole bunch of dots in the white space up on the where I had done all the stamping, just to kind of fill it in a little bit. There was just too much white space. And then I added just a tiny little bit of the black Glaze Pen to the panda's nose. And that's it. That finishes up my card for today. Thank you so much for joining me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've not yet subscribed, I'd love it if you would. And don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time a new video is posted. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.